When did you guys realize like the nutritional value of raw milk?
It's just that personal experience of knowing the bad things that came with pasteurized dairy growing up, and not only not experiencing them, but having all these positive markers of energy and focus and just feeling fueled and feeling healthy and getting stronger in the gym.
In most states, Costco is a big thing where it's like if someone returns something, even if it's unopened, has to get thrown away.
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Pasteurization was not created at that time for milk. It was created for wine, which is important to know because
All right, fellas, what is happening? How we doing?
we are surviving the winter, man.
Yeah.
And that's all we can ask for.
Dude, I'm pumped to have you guys on. I feel like you guys might have the most competitive slash better name than like in the world of like the food space. I feel like raw milk and deadlifts might take the cake.
Appreciate it. I don't know if it's brilliant or just random, but
No,
yeah.
meat mafia is pretty good. Don't
Meat
get me
Mafia
wrong.
is up there for sure.
Like we're at the table, but I give you guys props. There's something to like having a name like that, and you guys probably got maybe like questions about it, like what are you guys doing? And you say it enough, and you're like, man, like this name is hysterical, and you just end up owning it, and it's
Right.
like it works.
Well, it's funny, man. It's like with the fitness people, they're like, man, what is raw milk? But with the farming people, they're like, okay, so what exactly is a deadlift?
Yeah.
It's like
But
that.
then there's like the little niche of people who instantly get it right away. You guys probably did. The people who are into the food and farming like aspect, but also are into fitness. And there's a slender group of people who need no explanation.
Oh yeah, we're like that perfect overlap in the Venn diagram there. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, unreal. I'm stoked. I know we were going back and forth a bit trying to get this scheduled, but stoked to have you guys on. I think it'd be awesome just like as a place to start to give your guys backstory a bit. I know you guys are, big into faith, big into farming, big into fitness. So I'm excited to get into all those things. But if you guys could just give a little backstory, a little context behind your guys' journey to where you are today.
Yeah, so Luke and I met in kindergarten, and we've pretty much been best buds ever since. And because of that, we were raised super similarly. We grew up in West Virginia, standard American diet, not living off fast food per se, lots of home cooked meals, but definitely no emphasis on where food comes from or anything. And I'd say this whole rabbit hole got started before getting into food. It was really fitness. In high school, we wanted to start hitting the gym, if nothing else, probably to attract attention from the opposite gender, right?
That's always how it starts.
That's how it starts, just upper body only for probably the first couple of years. But we got into that, and then you just go down that rabbit hole and you start saying, okay, nutrition's important. So then we got into nutrition, and at first it was like hitting your macros, then non-GMO and organic, but still all store-bought, still probably full of seed oils, but it was organic. And then by the time we graduated high school, we both had a pretty big interest in really where our food came from. And yeah, a couple years after graduating high school, we both ended up on kind of like small scale homestead slash farms separately. I was working at one in Virginia. Luke was working at one in Maine. And obviously we stayed in touch, and through getting more into farming, keeping our passion with fitness, and then ultimately later finding our faith, we really just kind of came up with this idea of blending those three things together. And that's kind of how the whole raw milk and deadlifts as a business started, was just throwing our three biggest passions into a blender, and whatever happened happened.
Yeah, it wasn't too dissimilar from you guys where
Hmm.
I remember back in high school when we were in the lifting phase already, working out and stuff, and Tommy was he was really getting into the health and nutrition and stuff, and I was dealing with a lot of health problems, and it was ironically he was the one that said, he's like, hey man, you should probably try cutting out dairy. Because
Yeah.
at that point we was just, store bought dairy for your protein shakes or whatever. And one of the big things for me was acne. And I was complaining about my acne, and he was like, hey man, try cutting out dairy. at that time it was store-bought pasteurized dairy.
Right.
And he's like, try cutting that out. And I did, and it totally solved my problem. And that was after years of pills from the dermatologist, creams from the dermatologist. I would see the dermatologist once a month, and oh, try this cream, try this pill, But after 2 weeks of cutting out the pasteurized dairy, it went away. And that kind of led in the rabbit hole of all right, well, if my, dumb 17-year-old friend from West Virginia can figure out no, man, it's dairy. But the doctor with probably a PhD,
right,
was just prescribing, pill after cream. And my boy solved my problem. It was like, oh, wow, he fixed my problem faster than the PhD did. Maybe it is, diet, health, and lifestyle related rather than the pharmaceutical approach. That kind of led us into the whole rabbit hole of, whole food nutrition and okay, it doesn't not so much what are you eating, but where does what you're eating come from?
Yeah.
It kind of opened that whole door, which, can lead down, years of your life researching into that.
Right.
Totally. Yeah, there's that book. I think it might be Michael Pollan wrote it. It's called You Are What Your Food Eats.
Yes. Yeah.
That's kind of what you're hitting on. But the big takeaway that I heard you guys say is just the illnesses or issues that people deal with that are almost all food based, that we immediately turn to some pill or cream. I personally, I dealt with the same thing. Through high school, cystic acne, had to get on some pills for it. And it was just it was brutal. And not once was there a real conversation around nutrition to fix it. And then Brett, he had ulcerative colitis, which is a gut issue that, it's very much stress related, but a lot of people don't really look towards food as a way to fix it, because usually it requires some amount of drugs and food, depending on the severity, or fixing your food, and some amount of steroids or drugs to fix it. But I say all that because it's so many people have these stories about, and I think it's where the passion is born from, where it's food is insanely powerful. And when you pair that with being active, you start to really realize how good you can feel. So it's cool that your guys' story is born out of that similar kind of learning through trial by fire, and just actually having your own experience around it.
For sure. Yeah. And it's interesting you say that too about, how powerful food is, because I feel we kind of, like we said, started getting into it around high school. And when I graduated high school, the farm I went to work on, it was not really a functioning farm at that time. It was a big property, but it was being used for health retreats. So I went there because I wanted to be a health coach. Never thought I was going to get in hands-on into the farming. But through that experience, some people, I almost don't want to say they can take it too far as how intentional they're being, because I don't know if you can be too intentional with what you're eating. I think you can have a messed up mindset about, people will make a religion out of their food, and essentially think it will solve every issue ever. And I definitely went through that the first few years getting into it, of it's it was my identity. At some point you lose sight of why you're even doing it, and it's just, I'm the health guy because I'm the health guy. And then I got away from it from a little, and now fully coming back to it, it's so interesting because you really do see the value to where, is it the most important thing ever? No, especially us as, and you, people of faith. I think we realize that there's a spiritual component that is so important. But at the same time, when you get away from it, especially doing it for a while, getting away from it, you start realizing how bad you feel when you take the importance off of it. And you're okay, maybe this thing, it shouldn't be some idol that you worship, but it has the power to completely change the quality of your life day to day. So it is extremely important. And it's definitely not something to just throw out the window. Because I think a lot of people do. They're well, we're all going to die sometime. Yeah, but while you're here, how easy is it to get out of bed? What's your mood day to day? And later when you have kids, are you able to play with them? It is actually so important,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where the stress factor comes in, because how many times do you read like, oh man, I got a certain health ailment, I'll look into it, and they say it's stress related, and it's like, okay, well, how do you relieve that stress? Because like one of the things that really led Tommy and I into this whole journey was like looking up to these old time farmer guys who like they worked, they worked their butt off, and they were physical and healthy and stuff. But one of the common factors with these guys was their faith.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if a lot of these modern health, fixtures is, oh, meditate and it's all on you to fix it. But with the faith aspect of it, it's like, okay, well, if you can give all that up to like Tommy and I believe it's, God, the God of the Bible, we give that up to him. And it's like, okay, then it's not on you anymore. Boy, does that relieve a lot of stress where it's like your life is not dictated by you. It's dictated by an all-knowing, all-powerful God who he knows all your stresses. He knows all your fears, doubts, and worries. If you can relieve yourself of that, you can really see the health and healing that comes from giving all of that up.
Sure.
That's so well said. I think I'm still pretty early in my faith, got baptized this past year and have just been getting more and more into it. And I say into it in terms of just like really getting into the Bible and reading more about spirituality and understanding like who Jesus was. But I'm also, it's interesting to me, like looking at like Chinese medicine and these different forms of healing and how important belief is in the whole like just the whole structure of actually being able to heal yourself. It really does. It starts with like relinquishing that stress that's weighing on you, and understanding that you have to believe it, that you can be healthy, that you can be able-bodied. There's such a amazing power of prayer that I feel like a lot of people don't even really realize that they can tap into in terms of form of healing. So the faith piece I feel like is really a challenging one for a lot of people in the modern world, that that they're told that the God of their health is someone in the medical system,
Right.
is I think very far from the truth.
Yeah, I feel like that's why Tommy and we really appreciate a guy like Joel Salatin.
Mm.
Where he is just like, I mean, he's as blue collar as they come. He's as farmer as they get. And a lot of Christians would even look at what he has to say, like, that's Chinese, Eastern medicine woo woo.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, if you like really read the scripture, it's this relationship that you have with nature, like that is a gift from God,
Right.
And this healing and being one with nature. It's not worshiping nature, but it's kind of understanding your role in all of it.
Right.
And like there are huge benefits to that, to waking up with the sun and being understanding the role of us in our relationship with animals and nature. It's like we're not set apart from that.
Exactly.
I mean, I guess in a way we are, because we are supposed to have dominion over those things. That's man's role, but it's not just like, oh, if you just meditate and if you just, find your true self, then you'll be good.
Right.
It's like, no, if you understand how little importance you have, that really sets it in perspective, because it's not you, it's God.
Well, and it's like there's so many of those things like you were saying that I think are quick to be labeled as just new age or whatever, but like the sun, so healing. Knowing how to breathe properly, so healing. Being barefoot, so healing. And these don't have to be like these separate things. It's just, at the end of the day, it's just like physical laws of nature that obviously have been around since the beginning of time and have so much benefit. And I think so many people just lose sight of it, or put that in a box to where it's like, well, I've heard maybe new age people talk about it, so it means that getting out in the sun must be bad because I don't. And it's like, no, it's like the sun has been here before, like us, and there's Yeah. I mean, it's just such a topic, but it's also powerful and such a shame that so many people are losing sight of that.
Yeah, there's so much power to tap into. Um, I've experienced this past year, and would encourage as many people listening to get curious. I think that there's immense power that's, only only a few actions and thoughts away from you being able to access it.
Hmm.
I'm curious. So you guys talked about splitting up, going to Maine and going to Virginia and starting your guys' farming journey separately. How was that experience for each of you guys? Were you guys both pretty excited about getting in, like continuing to get into the raising your own food and really participating in like creating food in the food system? Like how was that passion sparked separately from each other?
Yeah, I say for me, like, so when Tom and I were in high school, we were already into like fitness. Obviously, we were lifting weights and working out and all that stuff. And we're into food. And at that time, we probably were just like, if it's organic, it's good.
Yeah.
If it's got that check mark, we didn't really understand. But if you got that check mark from the FDA, it's like USDA, oh man, we're good to go, man. We're
You can do no wrong.
You can do no wrong. And for me personally, when I went up to Maine to work on the farm, there wasn't this sense of like, I got to get in touch with the food system. I got to get in touch with, the root of where all my food comes from. For me, just as like, a dumb 19-year-old, it was like, I just wanted a cool job. So yeah, you know what? Farming sounds cool. Why not? I should go try it out. And so I went up there, started farming, and then I did. That's where I kind of realized a lot of work from the Western Aid Price Foundation was a big one for me personally, where it's like, oh, okay, so like it's not so much like what you eat, but where does what you eat come from? That's where it really kind of honed in, where you are what you eat, you know, and that's not just like, oh, if you eat sugar and fats, you'll be fat. But it was like, no, if you eat food that's like raised how it's supposed to be raised, if you eat food from where it's supposed to come from, that's, you know, you will be like a almost, a more fulfilled person, more fulfilled health wise and all that. Because for whatever reason, Maine seems to really appreciate small local regenerative agriculture.
Hmm.
Not sure why that is, because Maine has it's a very complicated state when it comes to that. But for whatever reason, they appreciate that style of agriculture. And I just happen to be lucky to end up there. It's funny, I was actually talking the other day when I went from West Virginia to Maine. I was like, man, I should work on a farm. That'd be cool. Organic farm. That'd be awesome. I Googled organic farm jobs near me, and Maine was the first one to pop out. I was like, I was in West Virginia, but I didn't really think of it. But when I Googled from me, ME is the abbreviation for the state of Maine. Like, West Virginia is WV, yeah. Maine is ME. So I don't. That was a work of God. I don't know what that was. Just like, here you go, idiot. That here's a little free, bone for you. So I ended up there, and whatever it is up there, they appreciate regenerative, local, small farms.
Mm.
And raw milk,
Yeah.
happens to be in Maine. Like Maine is a very raw milk friendly state. You can buy it on the grocery store. Mainstream grocery stores have raw milk for sale up there. And I remember just kind of stumbling across it and like, oh, what is raw milk? I thought pasteurized was like, oh, it's from the pasture.
Mm-hmm.
It's grass. That's good. Why not? But that kind of sent me down the rabbit hole. So me going up there to work on that farm wasn't some like, I'd love for it to be some sort of, Cinderella tale of, yeah, I'm going up there because that's a haven for agriculture, but it wasn't. That wasn't my intentions. It was just like, oh, okay, dumb 19-year-old boy being like, that's a cool job. But after a couple of years up there, that really set me down the rabbit hole of Whole Foods, where food should come from, how meat should be, how meat, eggs, and milk, like how they should be raised, And Tommy's got a little bit of a story from being in Virginia.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, where I ended up on that property, right out of high school, I was going there because they did like health retreats and I wanted to be a health coach. And when I got there, pretty much what we were doing was the health retreats that were hosted there. Most of the food would still be completely store bought, but it was organic, right? So we would go to the closest Whole Foods or Costco and just get all the organic stuff, or farmers markets. And the owners kind of had the idea shortly after I got there. Well, we have all this property. It was about 300 acres. Like, why don't we grow some of the food ourselves, right? Because it's cleaner and you could probably do some of that cheaper than spending all this money on organic food every week for groups of people. So I think it was summer of 2016, started with a garden and maybe 10, 15 laying hens. And the next year we got a few pigs. And then really where farming and getting into it and the raw milk and deadlifts thing kind of took off was would have been 2020 is when we got our first dairy cows. And I was really pushing that because I had been doing research on raw milk, really wanted to try it. Obviously, neither one of us grew up on it. We grew up on pasteurized dairy and both had problems with it. And I had actually been dairy free for a couple years at that point.
Yeah, we spent what 3-4 years on the nut milks. Yeah,
you know,
yeah, almond, cashew milk, all that stuff.
And we felt better, because it's like the crap in the store that we were drinking wasn't good. So it wasn't like the almond milk was doing anything good for us, but we just happened to be getting rid of store-bought dairy.
Yeah, the honeymoon phase of getting rid of the SAD, the standard American diet.
Which seems like every vegan has a honeymoon phase, just because they eliminate stuff.
That's its own podcast. Yeah.
That's its own podcast. But anyway, I had tried raw milk, really fell in love with it, really especially thought it was cool because I thought it was like this awesome bulking food for lifting, so nutrient dense. So I really talked to the owners at that farm into getting a dairy cow. And they were cool with it as long as I milked it every day. So that's kind of how I got into when you're milking a cow twice a day, every day, your lifestyle changes. And that's when it became much more into the farm. And yeah, just that sent us down the rabbit hole and we can talk about this some, but like when you literally get into the history of raw milk, it's so attacked, so vilified. The average person on the street who knows about it, a lot of people don't even know what it is, but they'll assume that it's dangerous. They've been told that it's dangerous. So I think that made both of us, when we both kind of discovered raw milk, so curious and asked questions as to why are all the health officials saying it's bad and harmful and going to kill you, when in reality, it seems to be one of the healthiest foods you can consume. And then you go down that rabbit hole, and that's really when you see, the whole food system is not at all set up for us to thrive. Most of what they say is bad is not, the whole animal fat, animal protein argument in and of itself, right? We're being told and educated that these are going to kill us and give us heart attacks when it's most of the time the opposite. So yeah, that's kind of what thrust me into farming along that same timeline as Luke.
It's so interesting that you guys like the history of raw milk. I think a lot of people don't really understand it or know it. There's a few great books out there that I'm sure you guys are familiar with. One of which is The Untold Story of Milk.
Yeah.
And it does such an amazing job laying out the history of it. But I can't help but think that the history of milk is such a great microcosm of everything that's happened in the food system. Like I can't say this with 100% confidence, but I would have to think that it's the first form of like highly processing of food that we started altering. And a lot of that happened at the beginning or end of the 1800s, beginning of 1900s. And just like the negative externalities that happened after that in terms of food our involvement with altering food and trying to make it have different characteristics in its natural form is so crazy. I'd be curious to hear you guys talk a little bit about the history of raw milk, just because this is your guys' wheelhouse. So
we talk about raw milk and we say like a lot of people who aren't into health whatsoever, and we tell them about raw milk, and they try it for themselves and like, oh man, I feel so much better than I did on either no dairy or the nut milks. They tried raw milk and like, man, this is awesome. Why the heck would this be illegal?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of call that quote unquote milk pilled,
Right.
because then you're like, wow, this is so amazing. Why would it be so vilified?
Right.
And then you get into, the history of the food system. Don't want to get your podcast censored, but then you get into around the same time that milk was pasteurized, the V word.
Yeah.
I almost don't even want to say it,
Yeah.
That came around the same time, and you're like, what? So this thing that is so amazing, they say so terrible. This thing is so terrible. They say is so amazing. And that leads you really into the rabbit hole of, you start reading these books, and the industrial agriculture started to happen, really started around that time in the 1800s, early 1900s.
Yeah.
And then end of World War II is when the industrial agriculture really took off. And then you see these negative health trends kind of aligned exactly with that era, 1940s, 50s, 60s, and especially the 70s is when it skyrocketed.
But you're right when you say that milk was kind of the first one to get it because, first of all, a lot of people don't even know pasteurization was not created at that time for milk. It was created for wine to extend shelf life. Which is important to know because we're the first ones to give Louis Pasteur crap, which he deserves.
Probably. Where pasteurization comes from.
Yeah, the
Louis
word pasteurization.
Pasteurization.
But he created it for wine. And anyway, so a lot of when industrial agriculture got assigned to milk, which led to how it's processed now, was right after the War of 1812. They banned importing whiskey from England. So
because we had just sort of fought a war with them.
We had just whooped them,
Oh, we whooped them. Pretty good. Yeah. Just throwing that in there.
Had to get that
back to back.
Back to back,
Back to back to back.
Yeah. So after that, Americans needed their whiskey. So they're like, okay, we better start making this stuff because most of the distilleries at that time, or a lot of them, were in England. So a bunch of distilleries in the United States started popping up. And what happened both in cities and in rural areas before this, and before people started flooding to cities, even in cities like Boston and New York and things like that, a lot of people still had family cows, or there was common pasture where people could keep their cows on. So that went away as people started flooding there. And with these distilleries, as a result of making whiskey, they had tons of spent grain that they had nothing to do with. And they're like, okay, well, this kind of coincides with our problem that we also have major population influxes in these cities that all want milk because it was a staple of the diet back then. We can't supply it. Let's, next to these distilleries, start creating dairies, and we'll pretty much solely feed them off of the spent grain. So it's a good business model. You can, supply the demand of the people. Well, they were known as distillery dairies, and these things, most of them were notorious for how heinous their sanitary conditions were. Actually, that book, The Untold Story of Milk, has some fascinating firsthand accounts of people, and it's like a horror movie. It is. I'm sure you've read some of that. I mean, it is so bad. Just cows dying and rotting, and a lot of the people milking the cows were just sick with tuberculosis and all kinds of crazy stuff. So naturally, people started getting sick, and not just because of the milk. The water in cities was terrible at that time.
Before cars, so everyone's riding horses.
So I'm sure someone tried to ride a cow.
Yeah, someone tried to ride a cow. But horses pooping in the street, so the cities are littered with manure.
And it wasn't just the milk, but a lot of people were getting sick. A lot of people were dying, and they were like, okay, how can we solve this problem? And there was a couple main trains of thought. One of them, that was actually, I forget the gentleman's name. They cite him in that book that we mentioned. He was, I believe, a pediatrician, and he worked with other doctors, and they were like, a great solution to this problem is to have standards for the dairies where we're getting our milk from. So we can find quality dairy to replace these distillery dairies. That'll solve our problem. The other camp. One of the main guys there, he was the co-founder of, it was either Macy's, I think it was Macy's or JC Penney. I think it was Macy's.
Macy's, yeah.
So not medical background, but business background. Said, well, what if we use this form of pasteurization, which had been done in Europe, to get rid of bacteria and improve shelf life and things like that. He's like, what if we do this to the milk? So that way we can keep this awesome business model we have, but don't maybe people don't drop that as much. And anyway, because obviously that was probably much more profitable, that's what got mainstream. And of course, we're brushing over many years of stuff. So
Right.
so we're paraphrasing here, but I think a lot of people don't realize that there was legitimate medical professionals who knew the value of unpasteurized milk who were pushing for it. But there was also some very powerful, wealthy individuals who knew they had a great business model that wanted to use pasteurization for that. So that was just kind of a very brief glazing over overview of why the heck we use pasteurization to begin with.
Yeah, it's a really powerful story if this is the sort of thing that piques your interest, because the idea that we're taking away the nutritional value out of this superfood, and then like really standardizing just the overall industry to the point where like you can't the standard is now you pasteurize instead of just having some sort of you know just like quality standards so that people can feel safe consuming the product. It seems like regulation just like moved in the wrong direction there, where they're still now able to treat these animals terribly. Like it's gotten better, but the animal welfare aspect of it all is very important. If you want nutritious food, you need healthy animals. And yeah, it seems like this was the way, the most surefire way to cut the corner, make the industry kind of stabilize, still be able to sell people milk, but not actually provide as much nutrition as it once did. And you had mentioned, I think the founder of the Mayo Clinic, I think his name is like J.W. Crew. I think he wrote the book The Milk Cure, and where he was curing people with raw milk from all sorts of different diseases. So it used to be like this, this food that people would rely on in terms of curing people of illnesses. And yeah, the fact that was the moment in time where it switched it's really fascinating. And it seems like we lost a lot without too much pushback on, well, I mean, there obviously has been pushback, but without really like, pushing back hard enough.
Right. I mean, it's no different today than it was back then, because Louis Pasteur, the pasteurization guy, he had his quote unquote like enemy, the guy who's on the other end of the spectrum. His name was Anton Béchamp.
Yeah.
And he was a guy who was big on, it's germ theory versus terrain theory. And if Louis Pasteur was germ theory, which is these germs are the enemy, we have to kill these germs at all costs. We have to do whatever we can to rid our society of these germs. Where Anton Béchamp was kind of on the other end of the spectrum, and he was saying, no, we have to be healthy vessels for these bacteria that already exist. And I get the simplest way to describe their differences was, if you have a dirty fish bowl and the fish are dying, Louis Pasteur was, okay, let's do whatever we can to nuke this fish bowl, kill everything of it.
Like vaccinate the fish.
Vaccinate the fish. Right. Whereas Anton Béchamp was, no, let's create a healthy fish bowl.
Yeah.
And create these fish that are resistant to this stuff. And that's books and books and books and podcasts and podcasts and podcasts about those two guys. But essentially, they were political enemies. And this Louis Pasteur guy had the newspapers at that time, was like the biggest, media. And Louis Pasteur was, buddies with these newspaper guys, and they would publish his stories and tell why Anton Béchamp was an idiot and Luddite and a caveman. He was backwards and old school. And uh, Louis Pasteur actually on his deathbed, as he was dying, he was like, you know what? I really think this Anton Bechamp guy was onto something. But I mean, if that isn't the exact story of what's happening today, where it's like, doesn't matter your science, your facts, whatever. If you know the right people and you can get your story out there, your story will win.
Mm-hmm.
You'll dominate the headlines, and people in rural America would grab their newspaper and they go, oh wow, this Louis Pasteur guy, he's really onto something. Maybe we should pasteurize our milk. And then it ends up being, oh, okay, well now you can't sell your milk to, if Luke here milks a cow, I can't sell it to Tommy without going to, Joe Schmo, who's got the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of pasteurization equipment, and then he can sell it to Tommy at a much higher price, and I get pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
It's time is a flat circle, nothing new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same story as it was in 2024 as it was in 1924.
Yeah, it's perfectly said. It's funny. I was going to say there's nothing new under the sun. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Yep.
So when did you guys realize like the nutritional value of raw milk, and what makes you guys like feel as though, and this is more so for people who have heard of raw milk and are interested in learning more about it. Like, what makes you guys convinced that it's nutritionally superior? Because there's mixed information out there,
Right.
depending on where you're looking.
I feel like for me, me particularly, I got into raw milk before I ever looked into like the politics and the history of it.
Yeah.
I realized it was a thing. I was like, oh, cool, I'll try that. And me and Tommy have been best buds for 20 years now, and we're 25, 26 years old.
Yeah.
And I just tried it. I was like, you know what? Why not? I've never had dairy before. I've heard that you can have raw dairy. Tried raw dairy, didn't have the effects that I thought it would. And we were both into lifting and working out still. And I was like, I called him up. I was like, man, I'm hitting all kinds of like PRs, personal records, PRs on deadlift and my weights. And it coincides with when I started drinking raw milk. It's like, dude, maybe there is something to this. And I'd call him up, and that was right around the time that he got into raw milk.
Mm-hmm.
He was experiencing the same thing.
Yeah.
So like, I feel like we came to our conclusions before we ever heard what the world had to say about raw milk. This was just
knew we were supposed to like it. Like it wasn't like we were told it's the superfood.
Right.
And because I know too, a big thing for both of us was we had negative reactions to store-bought dairy. So we knew that. And then when we introduced raw dairy, we knew we weren't getting those reactions again.
Right. It's like you hit one marker of like, oh man, one marker of health of like, I feel so much better cutting out dairy. Now it was store-bought pasteurized dairy, but we're like, oh man, we feel so much better cutting out this kind of dairy.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little while later, you introduce a new kind of dairy and you feel even better than you thought you even knew was possible. I was like, oh wow, I feel so much better with this stuff. How do you feel? And this was all before we looked. We weren't reading no books. We weren't looking into politics. None of that. It was just like pure, raw, personal experience.
And like a big one I noticed was in like the summer, if I consumed a lot of dairy, and this was before the raw dairy days, like growing up, if I consumed a lot of milk or dairy in very hot weather, I would sunburn to a crisp very fast, which looking back, I'm sure I was just inflamed, right? And very susceptible to the oxidative stress and burning up. And when I cut out dairy, that didn't happen. But then actually the first time I tried raw dairy, I was in Florida, and the farmers markets down there, at least at that time, and I think it's the same now, you could buy it at farmers markets if it was labeled pet food. That was the loophole. But so I was in Florida, so very hot, very tropical. I was outside for hours and hours a day, and I was consuming a lot of raw milk, anywhere from a quart, probably in the early days, like half gallon a day, just because you're obsessed with this new thing you found. And no sensitivity to sunburn. I was training a lot and doing jujitsu a lot at that time. No increase in inflammation. And yeah, just had so much energy to where, like, especially early on, that would be all I would consume a lot because, like, this is so nutritionally dense. I can slug a quart of delicious raw milk in the morning and feel so fueled, but also not so full. It's not like I ate this huge meal. I ate this huge meal, and definitely didn't eat that.
Not in Florida.
No, but so anyway, yeah, it was just that personal experience of knowing the bad things that came with pasteurized dairy growing up, and not only not experiencing them, but having all these positive markers of energy and focus and just feeling fueled and feeling healthy and getting stronger in the gym. It was so many personal wins before we cracked open those books like we talked about and looked into the science of trying to explain why we felt good.
Yeah, I'd say one of the big things too was like, okay, so I've been consuming it for a while. Let me really look what is in this, and you look at the vitamins and minerals that are in it, and you go, okay, well, raw milk is filled with vitamin A, D, K, zinc. You're like, damn, man, I'm buying these supplements.
Mm-hmm.
I'm buying vitamin A, D, K, zinc because they're supposed to be good for me. And people complain about the price of raw milk, which I do understand. But when you look at like, oh man, I'm buying $60 for a bottle of these vitamins and these minerals. Like, well, if I can just buy that in my raw milk and it's all in one, you're like, wow, man, maybe there is really something to this instead of like separating all of everything that's in raw milk and consuming it separately in like a pill form. Like if I can just get it in one whole food, how much more sense does that make?
And it's bioavailable, right? So there's all the enzymes that are there to help you break down the fats that are in it, the protein, the calcium, vitamin, like it's primed and ready for you to absorb much more than a lot of the capsules will be. So yeah, it's just it just makes so much more sense.
No brainer.
It's such a no-brainer. Yeah, what did you call it, milk pilled?
Yeah, right.
Once you're milk pilled, it's pretty much game over from there. Have you guys ever experimented with any sort of like fasting, like a raw milk fast?
Man, we've talked about wanting to do that for
So
years.
we've done fast.
Yeah, we've done fasting.
So dry fast where it's like 40 hours of nothing. Then we've done, water fast. We say, okay, you have nothing but water for what, 48 hours, 24 hours, whatever it is.
And then lots of intermittent fasting, like where we'll have just one meal a day or whatever. But man, we should be the first people who've done it with the brand, but we have not yet done the raw milk fast. But we have to set aside like a month. I would love to do a month to see that.
Yeah,
that would be so epic.
Me and my wife, we have a dairy cow, and it's not in milk right now. She's probably going to calf in the next 2 to 4 weeks, and I've decided, I was like, okay, look, once that cow is in milk and we have more milk than you know what to do with, because right now I still consume my raw milk. We buy it from a neighbor who sells it, but it's like, man, when you're spending $20 a gallon, it's like it's tough to survive on that. But man, when you have a dairy cow and you're getting like every morning and evening getting 3 gallons of milk in your fridge, it's like at that point it's just like economic. Like, well, all that nutrition I need is in my fridge. Let me spend 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it is, just consuming that.
Yeah,
just as an experiment, see how I feel.
Have you done that?
I did a 10-day one.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was more. I knew I was gonna be feeling amazing, but it was more so just to see the difference, obviously, and really get an understanding of like what it feels like to be solely on one food. I've done like the carnivore diet strictly before. So in terms of like elimination diets, I had experimented with that. And honestly, it was incredible. Like I would recommend it to people if they're dealing with inflammation, because like gut inflammation and the general bloating feeling, I don't think you get that with raw milk.
Right.
And then in terms of like working out and doing like physical activity, I was running and lifting and just drinking a gallon of raw milk each day and felt incredible. So like there's something to just simplifying for a bit and experimenting with it. And yeah, I would recommend it to anyone who's just trying to tap into just a change in perspective. Because like there's so many different things out there around raw milk, and you can easily survive off of raw milk alone. So
Right.
Was there like a transition phase, like the first few days? Was that tough at all?
honestly, the only thing that I really felt was like I missed actually like chewing food by like
Right.
day 5, 6, like just actually chewing food. But I'm also the type of guy who's like the convenience factor of literally just not
Yep.
having to cook anything and pour myself a mason jar of raw
Yeah.
milk and just be on my way. It's like this is as easy as it gets.
So when you were doing your carnivore strict, was it strict carnivore, or were you incorporating things like the fruit and honey that a lot of people do incorporate?
It was strict carnivore, and then I've started to incorporate honey and fruit.
Okay.
Nice.
Um, and I use carnivore as a tool, like, any sort of like fasting or things like that. I think for people who have autoimmune issues, going
Mhm.
carnivore is an incredible tool. For
Mm-hmm.
myself, it was really just an experiment on, how I felt. I experimented with paleo, experimented with keto, and I just wanted to
Yep.
get that feeling of being really strict with just a very select few types of foods. And it was the best I'd felt. I think long term, the jury's out. I know a lot of people who absolutely crush on it,
Yeah.
and they're amazing. I'm animal based throughout the year, eating 80-90% meat, and then
Nice.
the rest is kind of fruit and raw milk. Actually, I don't know. If I tally up my raw milk, it might be closer to like 80% because
Nice.
I have access. When I have access to it, I love drinking raw milk. It's
Oh
like
yeah.
Uh-huh.
convenient, nutritious, like quick,
So good.
all
Right.
things that are important.
And you incorporate eggs too
Yeah,
when you do the carnivore? Nice.
Yeah.
yeah.
The I've really wanted to do like a very strict carnivore. One of the things that made me want to do it recently again was it was just hunting season here. So we
Mm.
got freezers full of a few deer.
Yeah.
And just like by necessity, after working on the farm, usually with only one meal anyway, and the last few months has been like mostly venison cooked in ghee with eggs. And then, yeah, if you're drinking like raw milk, that's it. So it's kind of just out of necessity doing carnivore. But I'm like, I would like to see just out of curiosity, like you, just see how I would feel like doing that strict for a little more of a prolonged period of time.
Yeah,
And then incorporating that into lifting.
yeah,
Like,
See how
okay,
your lifts end up.
where are my lifts going to go
Yeah.
up? If they go down drastically, it's like, okay, maybe that's not the right move. But if you're lifting and then eating the one meal a day of strict carnivore, it's like, well, where's the argument against it?
Right.
yeah, yeah. I would say from like a body composition perspective, you'll probably look and feel like you're in the best shape you've been in after 3, 4 weeks. Like, you guys are young and healthy. Like a few weeks of it, you'll be like, wow, like I'm
Yeah.
really like, tuned up right now. And then I think there is like a little bit of an energy adjustment depending on like how far you're coming from. Like if you're coming from the standard American diet, you're
Yeah.
gonna feel like, you feel the energy adjustment drastically. But
Mhm.
if you're already eating healthily, like you won't feel that much of a drop off in your workouts. But I think if you get used to it and get adapted, your lifts will go up
For
pretty
sure.
significantly.
So cool. I mean, it's satiating too, though. That's one thing
Yeah.
I was like on those one meals. I was looking forward to them. You do not feel like you're starving yourself at all. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love like just the human science experiment behind all this, just tinkering with some nutrition, tinkering with the lifting. It's always been so interesting to me just to see like where the results are actually coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So when you did your strict carnivore, out of curiosity, did you incorporate coffee at all, like black coffee?
Mm, so I've incorporated black coffee sometimes, but there's been other times where I just do like bone broth instead of coffee.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, I would if you drink coffee regularly, I would say just continue to drink coffee, incorporate coffee into
Okay.
the program. But yeah, I've done it with both.
I do think that bone broth is, especially in the wintertime, like a perfect substitute for coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
Because
yeah.
sometimes you drink and you're just doing it's just cold weather. You're like, hey, I just want something warm to drink to start my day. But bone broth, man, it's yeah, you will. It's like it's got everything you need in there that will give you that boost. And maybe the first 2 or 3 days, the caffeine withdrawals can be something. But if you
Definitely.
could just do the bone broth to start the day, it's like once you get over that caffeine withdrawal, that's a perfect boost to your day.
So good. I mean, it's similar to raw milk, honestly.
Yeah.
So you just drink this nutrition bomb and you're good to go.
Yeah, I think marrow is another food that I just it's a nutrient bomb. There's so
100%.
many nutrients in bone marrow, and bone broth is more or less diluted down bone marrow. So
Right.
I I think I'm in total agreement with you guys. That's a top five food for me. It's like beef, bone broth, eggs, raw milk. I don't know what I would put in that fifth spot, but
Well, I mean, so I feel like when Tommy and I really got into raw milk, organs kind of
mm,
Yeah,
followed
yeah,
shortly
organs.
after that. And me and my wife, we just recently butchered a lot of chickens and a lot and pork, and we're about to do a couple of steers, beef too. And it's like, man, it's once you've gone through the process of, and Tommy lives nearby and has helped us with that stuff. It's like once you've gone through that process of doing your own animals, it's like that desire to use the whole animal
Yeah.
isn't necessarily like, well, I'm trying to be as healthy as possible, man. It's like, man, I went through all this work.
Uh-huh.
I want this thing to last as long as possible. And if you
Yeah.
can save your chicken, pork, beef liver, incorporate that, use the bones to make the broth, even if you have, go off carnivore and you have rice and pasta or whatever it is, but use those parts of the animal. Like, man, once you've done it yourself and have gone through that, like waking up extra early on a Saturday and doing the whole thing, you're like, I don't want this to go to waste just out of sheer, like, necessity or respect for this animal that I put in so much work for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it really makes sense, the whole nose to tail nutrition. It's like, it's not just like you buying the expensive stuff in the grocery store. It's like, man, once you do it yourself, like you can't, a lot of times you can't sell that kind of stuff, but it's like, once you know what's in it, man, you want to use it. You want to appreciate this.
Yep.
And you feel the benefits of it.
Yeah.
mm. Yeah. Does it shock you guys how much food waste there is in the US after going through the process of actually being food providers?
I feel like once we visit our hometowns, go back to our parents' house,
Yeah.
and you see them like take all the plates and scrape it into the trash.
Yeah.
It's like I mean, dude, even if you have 2 chickens,
They can eat that.
you understand the waste. Like, man, this food you're throwing away can very easily turn right into eggs, just like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because the chickens they'll eat everything from red meat to sour milk
Yeah.
to vegetables that, carrots that look ugly and are 2 inches long and crooked. They'll eat that. Like that won't go to waste. But I mean, after a couple of years, decades of you just throw it away. It'll be all right. The guy comes, takes it away, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
Boy, does that make you appreciate the waste.
There was a big grocery store chain. It was an Earth Fair. I think those are regional, but
Oh yeah.
big grocery store in Virginia at the farm I was working on, and we had to deal with them at the time that we would get all their produce scraps for our pigs, and it was just stuff that didn't meet their standards, that they wouldn't want to sell. So of course, initially we're expecting like rotten vegetables and rotten
Right.
fruits and things. We took a lot of the stuff they gave us for our pigs, like skimmed a lot. I mean, it was perfect for human consumption, but yeah, even if you're talking at the grocery level, if someone has a little blemish, they get rid of it. Someone's a little bruised, I mean, perfect food that's perfect to eat for people. They chuck out. I mean, we would have bins and bins each week.
And
They
I
would give
believe
us.
for anyone out there that is interested in doing that, I believe even the stickers to be like USDA organic, the stickers have to be edible.
Like to
And
at
now
least a degree.
they're not gonna like you're not gonna have a bowl of sticker soup for dinner,
Right.
but you don't have to go through the process of taking off all the stickers.
You
Like,
really-
the pigs can eat it because it's edible.
Especially the pigs. Like
The
pigs are,
pigs.
if there's one animal that can handle a few stickers, it's a pig. But
But that's just for anyone out there who's interested, who's like, well,
Yeah.
maybe I would, but I don't want to peel all those stickers. Stickers are edible. They're clean. And the USDA, FDA, they don't do a lot of things right. They mandated that. I'll give them props for that.
Right.
I'm no shill for the USDA, but they nailed that one.
They did.
For the homesteader out there.
But yeah, if people are willing to go around and ask and try to get hooked up with grocery stores or whatnot, there's so much food waste that your animals can survive on.
And I don't think it has to be even like organic food waste. Like the Earth Fare, I think they're like all organic and
it's like 80%,
whatever it is. Yeah. But man, I think even if you eat, I just use pork for an example, pork that was raised on that kind of food waste, even if it's not organic, boy, is that a better step in the right direction than just buying the pork straight from them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so true. Like I've recently got to experience like very high quality chicken and pork that was just like fed like everything naturally. And you just compare that with like grocery store quality pork and chicken, and it's totally different. And both those animals, I think, are typically just thought of as, they can kind of eat more or less anything. They're good recyclers of nutrients and can just like take care of a lot of the waste. So, but it is interesting that they also, even if they are eating that waste, they can still be higher quality than the grocery store.
Yeah, right. I think a very popular book with farmers is Thomas Jefferson's Farm Notes, because he was very into agriculture. I mean, like anyone in the 1700s,
right? You
had to be into agriculture, but obviously had a very big farm. And you look at what he would sell his chicken, beef, and pork for. Actually, chicken and pork were more expensive than beef. Because if you think about it back then, you're like, yeah, beef, all they need is grass. Grass grows free. No matter where you are, it's just grass. Pork and beef, you kind of had to supplement their diet. Now, this is where I get to redeem myself and rip on the USDA. And they've created a system where the grain that the beef is fattened up on is cheaper than just feeding it grass, which, if you really think about that, it's like, okay, so adding all this stuff to the beef actually ends up being cheaper than just having it graze. It's like that's this whole other book. That's a whole nother podcast, But the beef back then was the cheap meat. That's what the poor people ate. The well off and rich folk, they ate the pork and chicken because it had to be supplemented and labor intensive agriculture and all this stuff. But yeah, I guess that just goes back to, scraps that beef and pork and chicken eat versus grass-fed beef.
What do you guys think the most or least well-known thing is? Concepts, law, regulation, anything in the food system that people need to know about?
The big one, at least pertaining to raw milk, that I would say is the term that it's illegal gets thrown out a lot. And really, that's not true. And I think that's important for people to know because, I guess, first of all, I'll describe what I mean by that. Raw milk is truly illegal in, I don't have the states off the top of my head.
I think Nevada is one.
Nevada, I think it's like Nevada, Rhode Island. I think Washington, D.C. It's a handful. It's a very small amount in the United States. It's regulated in the rest, of course, and it's a spectrum, really. It's a sliding scale. You have states like Maine, you can buy it off the shelf. But then you have states like Virginia, where we spend a lot of time. It's illegal to sell in certain ways, but there's legal ways to get it via a herd share, which, if people don't know what a herd share is, you're pretty much paying for ownership of a cow and you happen to get your milk back. It's just a loophole, but you can legally get it through a herd share. Or like in Florida, I mentioned, you can legally buy it if it's labeled as pet milk. The reason I think that's important is just because if we really want to fight this battle of making it more accessible, we have to understand like just what we're actually going up against. And misusing the term illegal Like, for example, a case of it being truly illegal in its purest form would be there was one state or province in Canada, and I don't even know if it's still a law, but at one point it was this big story to where even if you had a cow, you were legally not allowed to consume the raw milk from your own cow.
Yeah, Ontario, Canada.
Was it Ontario?
No, that's a city. Province wise, you
Yeah.
lost me. But Ontario, I know that was a thing.
So like that's an example of like truly illegal, right? And if we want to get into the laws and educate people and whatnot, doesn't mean we have to be happy about the silly regulations, but to understand that it is kind of a sliding spectrum, and we actually do have some stuff to be grateful for, as much as sometimes it's easy to complain about how restricted things are. Like even just taking Virginia, before we had our cows in Virginia, we were blessed enough that we could do a herd share, right?
Mm.
Or people in pet milk states. It's goofy that you have to buy it with pet milk. That's a lot better though than that law up in Canada.
Right.
So I would, and it also scare. I think it makes it worse because it scares people away more. If everyone thinks it's illegal, well, we can change that when we talk to people and go, maybe they're like, oh, I thought raw milk was illegal. I'm afraid to try it. Well, actually, it's not illegal.
Yeah.
There's regulations. And I think if people are more educated on that, they'll be less intimidated by it than blabbing about how it's illegal everywhere all the time. That might not be the best conversation starter if you're trying to convince someone to drink it,
Right.
you know.
I also think with what we were just talking about with pork, where I think a lot of states, if not most states, I don't have them off the top of my head, but you can't sell commercial pork if it was fed from scraps, say from the local elementary, high school, whatever it was, all their cafeteria scraps are thrown away. If you were to take all that, feed it to pigs, you can't sell that pork. If that, if you're following me, which to me is ridiculous because it's like, okay, it's illegal because they would say, oh, well, you don't know what's in it. It's like, well, we do know what's in it. It's what you were feeding our kids. It's what you were feeding our teenagers. It's what you were feeding, the local soup shelter for homeless people. The only thing those pigs were eating were things that you deemed were okay for humans.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk of like, okay, can we sell it if it was labeled quote unquote eco-friendly because it's getting rid of waste? Because if you've watched any of the documentaries like Food Inc. or all those, how long a lot of food takes to break down in landfills. I think like a head of cabbage takes like 25 years to break down in a landfill. But I'll tell you, if you feed a head of cabbage to a pig, it's gone in seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so if we, and I'm not even saying this perfect because it's not organic, it's not clean. But man, if you can use pigs as a tool to get rid of waste, that's a heck of a lot better than feeding it, GMO conventional grain. That and I do believe that's a higher quality pork because it is eating a more diverse diet
than just slop.
In most states, it's like, I think Costco is a big thing where it's like they will not, if someone returns something, even if it's unopened, has to get thrown away.
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
States are pushing for, let us use that to feed animals because it's better for the farmer, better for the consumer, better for the pig. But last time I checked, at least with Costco, just as an example, like even if it's unopened, it can be tuna, cabbage, apples, whatever it is, straight in the trash. And straight to a landfill where it sits for 5, 10, 15, 25 years. But if you can turn that into a higher quality, more nutritious pork product, even if you wanted to just feed that to pigs and then that pork was given away to homeless or people in need, that is such a better alternative than just throwing it away.
Totally.
That is a big law that a lot of farmers have a gripe with.
Totally. Yeah. The food waste topic is so interesting. We had Joel Salatin on our podcast, and I think he was the one who kind of opened my mind to how much we're actually wasting. And I like the way he weaves in the globalist mindset of like we need to feed the world, and that's kind of like the driving force behind the industrial food complex is we want to feed the world, but then we waste 50% of the food that we grow. So, we really don't have a food problem in terms of the quantity that we make. It's seriously all around the quality, which is why I love the content that you guys have been putting out. And it seems like you guys have just been fighting the good fight and sharing the message, which is incredible. There's so much more I want to dive into, but we're basically at the top of the hour. I did want to ask you guys one last question because I want to hear it straight from you guys. So when you guys have someone who comes to you for the first time and they're like, hey, interested in raw milk, give me like the short, quick pitch on is it safe? Just like, what's your guys' pitch when someone comes to you and is like, I'm interested, what do I need to know? Where should I go?
It's gonna kill you. That's what we tell them.
So more for us.
Yeah. I would say the first thing is look, healthy cow usually is gonna equal healthy milk, right? So you look at this cow, especially if they're at the farm, right? Look at this cow. It's eating grass. It's living the way it should. It's in sanitary conditions. God didn't mess up.
Well, that's one big thing is like if your farmer will even let you see their farm.
That's like a red green flag thing.
You go to a farmer's market and you're like, oh, say you're blessed to be in a state with raw milk. Go to the farmer and say, hey, can I see your farm? From my experience being in farming for the past couple of years, a farmer with how much work they put into it will be more than happy to show off their hard work.
Yeah.
If they say, no, you can't, you go through this, blah, 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 red flag.
Big red flag. So letting them see where it comes from, giving them a brief pitch like we were talking about with you about, hey, here's the real reason historically why they used pasteurization, because they were farming it in this way. And we agree, farming it in this bad way creates problems. So let's look at how this cow's being treated, what it's being fed, how it's living, is it clean, all this. And then also, we do recommend people start slow. Like if they've never had raw milk, especially if they're coming from the standard American diet. Only reason is not because it's going to hurt you, but like a lot of people, like with different fermented foods and things like that, it can be extremely good for you, but your body can have an adjustment reaction. Like if you've never had it before, and that reaction can be, it can be perceived as pretty nasty, right? Like you might be on, like if you're irresponsible, you might be on the pot for a while,
right.
Like
healing is not always comfortable.
Healing is not always comfortable. So we just recommend, look, especially if you're coming from the standard American diet, have a small glass. Don't crush a quart right away. And just ease your body into it because it is such a nutritious food. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of living enzymes and bacteria in there that are so healthy, but you just want to introduce that to your body slowly. But I feel like the best way we do it is we love to get people to see the cows and just see start to finish the process. And rarely, especially if we can get them to milk a little bit, once people milk the cow, do all this, see how it's, handled and everything, pretty rare are they not all kind of gung-ho by that point to like want to complete this whole cycle of life, we saw the cow eating, we milked the cow, we want to reap the rewards from it. I guess that's also the thing though, is we usually get in such long conversations with people about it. I don't know if we do have a 30-second conversion speech to convince someone. It's usually like, come to the farm, milk a cow, and let's get you milk pilled for a couple hours, right?
And I feel like there's two things kind of in particular. If someone's interested, we get a lot of DMs on Instagram. We send them to a website called realmilk.com.
Mm-hmm.
And you literally type in your zip code and it shows you the closest raw milk producers in your area who have signed up for it.
Yeah.
And realmilk.com is the biggest one. So like if you have a producer in your area, they are most likely.
And that's also the Weston A. Price started realmilk.com.
Yeah, that's not us. We don't have any financial,
unfortunately, we have no financial.
If anyone's ever talked to them, tell them that it's 10% our way. And two, it seems like a lot of the people who are into raw milk have at least discovered this idea of the gut biome. Sometimes people just hear about it and they're like, oh, what is healthy food? That's rare. Most people who are asking, if they get to the point where they're asking about raw milk, that have at least heard of this idea of the gut biome, we're big on telling those people that raw milk is actually healing for the gut. It's not doing any damage, and it's not just plateauing and keeping you the same. It's actually doing a good for your gut, and that's where like the healing isn't always comfortable comes in.
Yeah,
because if you are coming off the standard American diet, but you've heard about the gut biome and you have a little bit of milk, it could very well be uncomfortable for you. But people who are into kombucha, fermented foods, living foods, they're more apt to handle raw milk. But we tell them, like, look, just a heads up, like, this is gonna be doing some work on you. This isn't just a glass of water. Like, this, start slow. And then people get the same advice with kombucha. Our friends who are homesteaders and make kombucha, like, this is a very alive, living food, and if you're used to eating dead, sterilized, pasteurized food, this will be quite the shock to the system. But most people who are into raw milk have at least crossed that bridge,
Yeah.
So when they have raw milk, they're more apt to handle it. I feel like that's the two things that we're big on is realmilk.com, but also be prepared when you finally get your hands on some.
So there was a super short answer for you.
Yeah. That was a 10-second answer, right?
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a short answer when it comes to raw.
Right.
That's it, like, just try it.
That might be the new bumper sticker that we throw out there.
But also just finding a good source, which, as you said, realmilk.com, that's our go-to source for people. Just go to realmilk.com. You'll be able to find some local raw milk, which is nature's most what is it, liquid it's not liquid gold, but white gold.
White gold. Yeah, exactly.
It's incredible. Well, fellas, I appreciate you guys coming on. This is great. Love the raw milk deep dive. We gotta have you guys back on for a part 2 so we can talk about some of the other stuff, but really appreciate your guys' time, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks, brother. And when we finally start a podcast, you guys are first guests.
Oh yeah, there you go.
I love it. Let's do it.
Yeah, cool. All right, brother. Man. Thanks, man.